This is Dear Strategy, episode 111. Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product and business strategy. Real questions from real people in real companies, just like yours. Welcome back, strategy creators, to another great episode. This is episode 111, and still coming to you from the middle of a lockdown, going into week 8 now. And this is the COVID lockdown. Of course, those of you who may be listening sometime in the future, I'm sure none of us will forget this time. So I think you'll know what we're talking about. But located here just outside of New York City, and definitely feeling this thing. And what's interesting about this, the only reason I bring this up is because typically what I'll do for Dear Strategy is I plan out my episodes for the year. I mean, this is a show about strategy and planning. So, you can imagine that the guy who hosts it is a planner. So, I typically will plan out, in some cases, a year's worth of shows because we have a backlog of questions, and, typically we'll do a show every other week, which ends up being about 26 shows a year. So not too bad, right? I can plan out which shows I want to do. And as I announced in the beginning of this year, we're, have this new format. We're kind of varying between traditional strategy questions and then these strategy stories, where I'll talk about some things that happen or things that, we see on the news or things like that. We analyze them from a strategic standpoint. So I think there's been a lot of interest in that and been going really well. So all that said, planned out the 26 episodes that we would do this year. And I typically will record maybe 2 to 4 of them at a time. Most of the topics that I talk about are things that, are not extraordinarily timely. But sometimes things like this happens with this lockdown, and it'd be odd, right? If I had, 3 months of recordings and I didn't even acknowledge the fact that we're in this crisis. So I typically will do maybe 2 to 4 weeks. Anyway, I mention all of that because the episode that I'm going to be talking about this week is an episode on the airlines. And it's basically a story that happened last year to me, and I wanted to analyze the strategy. And it's a story of, as you could imagine, not so great customer service experience that I received on an airline. The original thing that I was going to talk about was, my goodness, how can airlines expect to keep up this level of service and expect that customers will continue to travel with the frequency that they're traveling and continue to put up with it? And I was going to ask that question versus, or is this a good strategy, what they're doing? Because we obviously keep coming back for more, right? So that was the intention. That's what we were going to do. But then, of course, this COVID thing strikes, and the airlines are decimated. I mean, no one's flying, for the last 6 weeks, easily, probably 8 weeks, maybe more. People are not flying at all. And, the airline industry is down. I read places, 90, 95%, whatever the numbers are. But it's crazy, crazy numbers. And so now, featuring this episode almost felt a little strange. Like, man, do I kick these guys when they're down? I mean, it's an odd thing to be talking about when obviously that industry is in such dire straits. But then I said, I think it's actually more appropriate to talk about it than ever, because the question that I was going to ask, which is how long could they continue to do this? I think it's now coming to light, right? Like, what is that airline industry going to look like when all of this is done? Because people have now learned to live differently. They've learned to live without having to travel cross country. Never thought we'd be able to do it for this long, but we are doing it for this long. And we're going to do it even longer. And so now airlines have to really rethink their business model if they want people to come back voluntarily to start flying again, right? So I think it's actually more appropriate than ever. So let me tell you what the story was. As you can imagine, I'm a frequent flyer. I travel a lot for business, do workshops with clients and so forth. So I do a lot of traveling, and I have good status on at least one of the airlines. And usually what I'll do is I'll buy a ticket I won't talk about exactly which airline I fly and things like that, because I don't want to single anybody out, but all the airlines have the same basic thing. They have business class, and then they have the class beneath business class, which goes by various different names. And then they have the economy class. And some airlines are even doing multiple classes beneath that. But for now, we'll talk about those three. So business class, of course, is extraordinarily expensive. Most clients won't pay for business class, right? The class just below that is usually pretty reasonably priced with respect to the economy class, maybe a few bucks more to fly in that second class of service. And you get a couple of more inches of leg room, but for a business traveler who does it a lot, it makes a big difference, right? So I usually spring for that one. And then economy class after this is like ridiculous. It shouldn't even be allowed. I mean, the way that they squeeze you in arm to arm, shoulder to shoulder in seats that clearly were not designed for human beings. I mean, it's just absolutely unbelievable. So, flying there is rare for me, thankfully. I feel fortunate that I can fly in that kind of second class of service, but that's kind of what I typically do. And then frankly, I get upgraded quite a bit because of my status. So I'll buy that second class, and that gives me a little bit better chance on the upgrade list as well. So a lot of times I'll get upgraded. So I'm used to traveling in that middle class, kind of service as the minimum, and sometimes an upgraded seat. So I was on a trip, and as is very often the case, my flight got delayed, right? Flying into and out of New York you could almost always guarantee that you're going to be delayed in some shape, form, or fashion due to air traffic control, whatever else. So this particular flight got delayed. And this particular flight, I had paid for that middle class of service, and I was already upgraded into the business class version. So I was pretty happy about that, right? It's a much different flight, believe me, when you're in business class than not. So whatever. So delay. And then as often, I won't say often, but as happens from time to time as well on this particular route that I was going, the flight actually ended up getting canceled. So the flight gets canceled, and it was last flight out of the day. So I was either going to have to get a hotel or maybe try and get rebooked. So the airline did say, because it was not weather related, it was something that was mechanical or whatever, it was their fault, so to speak. They were able to book me onto another airline. Okay. Another flight that was going out, was going to be going out in about an hour or whatever else. It was already pretty late at night. So they were going to book me on this other flight. I said, fantastic, great. So they give me the ticket and automatically get the middle seat in the economy class, which is the worst one that you can get. Now, I'm not trying to be elitist here. I will tell you that it's very uncomfortable for me flying that way, but not trying to be elitist. I know a lot of people do fly that way, so I don't deserve any special treatment above anybody else, except for the fact that I had already paid for a premium ticket, right? And was already upgraded into the business class version. But that I'll put aside. I mean, but the fact is I paid for this middle class of service. This other airline that they booked me on also had this middle class of service. So my natural question is, why didn't you just put me into that middle class of service? Was it sold out? I would understand that, right? They said, no, that's not the way it works, right? When we transfer over, you get whatever seat they give you. But go to the counter and talk to them. So, of course, I'd go to the counter and I'd talk to them. I said, look, I was in this middle class of service here, and they got transferred over to this flight, and now I'm in the worst seat that you could possibly have, short of being, stuck in the toilet. What can you do? Is there anything you could do? They said, well, we do have seats in our middle class of service, but you have to pay. I said, yeah, pay. I already paid, right? I was like, ridiculous. They said, no, well, you haven't paid us, so we have to. I was like, this is unbelievable. So I said, okay, I'll pay, right? And what is it? It wasn't that much. I think it was, I can't remember the exact price, but it was somewhere in the $50 range, $25 to $50, whatever it was. So I paid. I said, okay, now I'm going to be in that middle class of comfortable service, whatever else. Well, I get on to the flight. And turns out that their version of that middle class service wasn't the same as my airline's version. They had another class, which was like the worst seats that you could possibly have, which is the middle seats in economy. And then if you wanted to pay for an aisle seat, then that's what I paid for, was basically to get an aisle seat, but still in this horrible class of service. And then there's another one, which was an exit row. And they said that this was an exit row, but it wasn't an exit row. So it was just a horrible experience. And of course, I was uncomfortable for the whole flight. Now, okay, looking back on it, it was 2 hours of my life, whatever it is, not the worst deal in the world. And I don't want to be pampered and spoiled and sound elitist. But the main problem I have is that I paid for something and that didn't translate over to the other airline. And that really bothered me, especially since there were plenty of seats in their true middle class of service, which they never even offered me. So I started thinking about, what does this mean? Because of course I could get upset as a consumer and customer, whatever else, and went through all those emotions. But I try and always think about these things as, what was the strategy there? I mean, what did the airline gain? And I guess they know that I'm loyal to the other airline. I'm never going to be loyal to them, right? So why should they do anything special for me? They should squeeze me for every dollar that they can. And even if they squeeze me for every dollar that they can, they still don't give me good service, it's not going to really matter because I'm probably not going to go back to that airline. And, you could argue that they could be right. That so what's the difference if they treat me like garbage because I'm not probably going to switch over to that airline? But boy, I just don't know that that's a good long-term plan, right? I mean, what would it have cost them to give me a decent seat? Nothing. What would it have cost them to give me a comfortable experience? Nothing. And what it cost them in not doing that is the fact that I really never want to fly that airline. Now, I've moved 4 or 5 times in my life to different states and locations, and every one of those states have a different hub of airline. And I could switch over to this airline, no problem at some point. But if there's choices, I won't because of this experience. I just can't imagine that was a good strategy for them, right? So again, the two sides of the coin, just to make this clear, side one is they think they're never going to have me as a customer. So why should they treat me better? Why shouldn't they get every dollar that they can? And I think a lot of businesses do believe this, right? If they're dealing with somebody else's loyal customer, they say, well, why should I go out of my way? Why shouldn't I just get them for every dollar I can get them for? And this isn't just airlines. I've talked to other businesses that feel this same way as well. Like they're going to give special benefits to their loyal customers, but somebody else's loyal customers, why should they do anything special for them? And the answer that I have from a strategic standpoint is because you might be able to convert them, right? You might be able to convert them over to one of your loyal customers. And if you don't convert them directly, you're going to get their approval. You're going to get them to say good things about your company to some of their friends and some other people. I just can't see how that's not worth it. But of course, this airline didn't think it was worth it. Well, why I think it's more appropriate now than ever to talk about that, even though the strategy seems obvious, like they probably had a bad strategy there. But now here we're in the middle of this COVID thing, right? And airlines are going to come back very slowly, in my opinion, whatever my opinion's worth. I don't think people are going to just jump on planes to the same kind of volume that they did, 8 weeks ago. It's not going to happen that way. They're going to come back slowly. And because they're coming back slowly, they may not be loyal to just one airline, right? They may not be traveling as frequently as they did. And I know in my case, I'm loyal to one airline because I travel so frequently on that, and I want to get all the benefits that one airline will give me. But if I'm not traveling as frequently, I mean, my business model is now going to go from in-person classes to virtual classes. And I bet that's going to stick long past this crisis. I may be taking far fewer flights than I did before, in which case I may not want to stick to just one airline, in which case I'm going to have choices. And the airline who's going to give me the best comfort, the best service, that's the one I'm going to go for. I mean, when you think about what really drives the economy is supply and demand, always, right? That's always it. And at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot less demand. And I think airlines are going to have to be thinking about that and thinking about the way they were treating us before. I don't know if that's going to work anymore. We've gotten used to something different, right? And I think the ones that realize that's not going to work anymore, jamming people in shoulder to shoulder, charging them for, the luxury of carrying a bag with them. I mean, the most ridiculous things that they've done, the change fees, the whole 9 yards. I just don't think it's going to fly. And I really think if I was consulting with some of these airlines on their strategy, the long-term strategy, I'm not, by the way, there's no conflict of interest here, but maybe I will after this episode. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I just think they're going to have to rethink things, rethink their entire business model, because this idea of ignoring someone else's loyal customer, boy, I just don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to work. And I think you can translate that to a lot of businesses and say the same thing. So anyway, that's the story. That's the analysis. For whatever that's worth, that's kind of what I think. And if that helps you in any way, thinking about your business, maybe you were treating some of your customers that way. Maybe you had some of that same mindset. Hey, my business is great. I have plenty of volume. Why should I be trying to lure in other people's customers at this point? Let me charge them as much as I can. That might not work going forward. I don't think it worked before, to be very honest with you, but it certainly needs to be rethought as you move forward. So if you have something that you want to share with us, I don't want to turn you off and say that I had a year's worth of episodes. Therefore, if you ask a question right now, I'm not going to squeeze it in. I do that all the time. Even though I plan out the year, if somebody asks me a question that I think is current and needs to be addressed now, I do sometimes put that in. So please do that, especially if you have strategy stories that you want to share. I definitely am looking for those. So please go ahead and hit us up. And you go to dearstrategy.net or dearstrategy.com. Click on the contact link and you'll be taken to a form where you can submit a story or a question to be featured on the show. While you're doing that, please don't forget to make time for the plan. We'll see you back here on another episode of Dear Strategy. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to Dear Strategy with Bob Caparelli. To learn more or to submit a question to be featured on our show, please visit us at dearstrategy.net.